All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast, where we got the Texas Longhorns today. If you are enjoying the content, please make sure to like and subscribe. We appreciate all the support. But we're going to kick things off with Cody here talking about some offensive strengths of the Longhorns.
Yeah, probably. I mean, Rodney Terry is obviously out the door. Sean Miller is here, and he was able to retain some of the important pieces from last year's team, and Jordan Pope and Tremont Mark. He was able to convince to hang around. Obviously, there's some new pieces around him. Brought Dalen Swain from Xavier. So, I mean, the talent accumulation is there, and I think there are multiple initiators on this offense that you can trust for stretches of a game. Like I mentioned, Pope and Mark are back, and two guys that they've also been pretty sure-handed throughout their careers. I think this is a team that's going to be able to take care of the ball at a pretty high level. 13% career turnover rates for both guys, so I do think they're going to be fine in that area. And I mentioned Dalen Swain. He's another piece to monitor when it comes to initiating offense for this team. I think he also provides an extra ball handler at the forward position to make this to make the turnover rate probably even better. I think it's pretty safe to say they'll be, at least inside the top 100 if I had to guess. I think he's a guy that can operate in like the dribble handoff game. He can operate a little bit as a pick and roll handler. He's a bit limited as a perimeter scorer, but he's going to be able to get downhill, make some plays, do some stuff in transition as well. I just think he's a solid two-way connector piece for this team. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of primary action with this offense in general, which, there's good and bad parts about that. I'm sure Marcus will get into that here in a minute, but they actually have guys that can create some advantages for others and for some of these off-ball pieces. And just one final thing, I think there's some offensive rebounding juice here with Voikatitis coming from Florida Atlantic and Lassina Traore, who sat out last year, was at Xavier, had I believe it was an ACL. But he's a guy that can provide some stuff on the offensive glass. In their last full seasons, they were both over 12% in offensive rebound rate. Guys like Nick Cody, John Clark, and Declan Duru are potential helpers in this area as well. And one other guy that can be really solid on the offensive glass is actually Kendall Weaver, who was a 6'3", like smaller guard, but he has a ton of energy, gets all over the glass. He had a 9.4% offensive rebound rate last season. So I do think this is a team that will be a little bit better in the extras, I think, than they were last year under Rodney Terry, and even better than what Xavier was under Sean Miller. So I think that's definitely a positive. I'm sure Marcus he'll dive into his negatives here in a minute, but I at least think from a shot volume perspective, they'll actually be okay.
Marcus, anything to add from a strength perspective before diving into those weaknesses?
Not really. I mean, I was going to bring up the offensive rebounding as well. I think that they will be better in that area. But, before I dive into weaknesses, just going to preface this, like, I am a Texas fan, and like, unfortunately, like, I don't love the outlook for this team. Like, yes, there are some pieces, as Cody said, some talent. But I have my fair share of concerns with the offensive group. And it really starts with just their overall, like, shot quality. Shot diet is a big problem, I think, for a lot of these guys, starting with like Tremont Mark, Jordan Pope. I mean, for anyone that watched Texas down the stretch last season, I mean, obviously they had Trey Johnson there as well, as an elite scorer. But, in that, like the SEC tournament, Texas, when they would really struggle and end up taking a lot of like contested mid-range twos. And that's really where a guy like Mark has to live as well, because he's not like a very good three-point shooter either. Like he's fine, but that's definitely not the strength of his game. Jordan Pope, good three-point shooter, but he's also like big into the one dribble pull-up game. Simeon Wilcher coming over from St. John's. I mean, St. John's took horrible shots last year, and he was a big part of that, taking a lot of, again, contested mid-range shots, which ultimately leads to like this group not having very good efficiency, right? Like Tremont Mark, 47.2% effective field goal percentage for his career. Simeon Wilcher last year was 47.3% effective field goal percentage. And then like you mentioned, like I do think they'll take care of the basketball fine. But along with shooting efficiency, like there's just not a lot of very good off-ball shooting on this roster. Like Jordan Pope had a little bit of a down year, I guess, last year. He kind of it was very uneven. It felt like, right? Like he'd have games where he really shot it well, and then he'd come back the next game and really struggle. So like he can shoot it off the ball, but then, you're going to be playing Swain a lot of minutes. He can't shoot it at all. He was 7 for 28 from 3 last year. Wilcher really struggled. Now, I do think Wilcher's a little bit better of a shooter than he showed last year. But even still, he shot it really poorly last year. He was 33 of 111, 29% overall. Kendall Weaver, another guy that can't really shoot, more defensive-minded guard. I already alluded to Mark a little bit. So like, and then the front court doesn't have any floor spacing at all. Traore not stepping out behind the arc. Voikatitis, same deal. Maybe Cam Heide can provide some value here. He shot it well for his career, of course, 41% at Purdue. But, that was playing alongside Braden Smith. And he was also had a big and like Edie or Kaufman Wren that, people were paying a lot more attention to. So with less shooting on the floor, I think his looks are going to be a little bit worse. So, for me, it's just the efficiency, the shooting. And then finally, like, I think, like you said, they're going to take care of the ball fine. But a lot of these guys, like, that are going to have the ball in their hands a lot, like Mark, like Pope, they're more create for themselves, right? They're not really guys that have ever really created for others. So I have big concerns with that because I think it's going to become an offense that is very much like ISO driven and takes a lot of bad shots in the mid range and contested shots at the rim. Granted, like we alluded to, I think they'll be better on the offensive glass, but big concerns for me with this group having no real, like they have guys who can initiate offense, but it's pretty much all for themselves.
Cody, any concerns you want to add in? I know Marcus kind of covered all of them, I think, but
I had the same ones. I don't have much more to add. I kind of just want to drive home some points that he had. The point with Cam Heide, I think, was kind of spot on. Like when you look at it, it's backed by the numbers as well. He's mostly a stationary catch and shoot piece. Most of his attempts at Purdue were unguarded. He was in the 95th percentile in unguarded catch and shoot frequency, and there's no movement shooting in his game. And then just to drive home the point about the mid-range attempts with this group, obviously Trey Johnson was a big driver in that, but they were in the 96th percentile nationally in field goal attempt percentage in the mid-range at 19.2% of their shots in that area. They were efficient there, and I think they can be efficient there again. It's just not a strong play type over the course of 40 minutes. And then just one other point, I guess, that wasn't talked about as much. Like I completely agree, the off-ball shooting is a concern. The shot diet is a pretty big concern as well. But they're not getting like a ton of help in high volume from the bigs. Like I think Voikatitis and Traore can get on the glass and be like play finishers. And there's a little bit of what they can do through the post. I'm not really a believer in Traore's post-up game. It was a very high usage at Long Beach State. I just don't really think he dominated that competition as much as he probably should have for that to translate up to the SEC. And Voikatitis, like he's pretty unstoppable once he has the ball under the rim, but it's just a matter of getting the ball under the rim consistently. He's not the most skilled with the ball in his hands. He's not the most functional athlete out there, but I do think he's a guy that can carve out space well. He's just not a guy that you're going to give the ball to and trust to make a decision with the ball in his hands as like a post hub. So, but besides that, I agree with all the points that Marcus mentioned.
All right, we're going to flip to the other side of the ball, and Marcus, we'll send it over to you and talk defensive strength of the Longhorns.
Yeah, I mean, I think they should be they should be solid on the defensive glass for starters. I mean, they're going to have Traore and Voikatitis up front. Traore has a career 26% defensive rebound rate. Voikatitis in his only year at FAU was at 20%. And I think there are some wings that can really help out in this area. In a guy like Cam Heide, 17% defensive rebound rate last year. Dallin Swain, another guy who, I think he's going to be a real strength for this defense as a guy who's hyper versatile. He can guard multiple positions, make a lot of plays on this end. 18.5% defensive rebound rate last year. Then a couple more notes on him. He's got a career 2.8% block rate and a career 3.1% steal rate. So, he really has the ability to impact the game quite a lot on this end, which is, I think, where he's going to provide, along with his initiation in the offense, like Cody mentioned, and strengths. I think he's going to provide a lot of value. So I think the defensive rebounding should be an area where they should be pretty good. Then I think, like, aside from that, I think they have some guys that are capable of, like, making some plays. Like Tremont Mark hasn't really been a fantastic defender, but he's been solid with his length in like making plays. He's 6'5", lankier guard. I don't know what his wingspan is, but it seems much longer than 6'5". As I mentioned, Swain, good in that area. Kendall Weaver, he's always kind of just been more of a pest. The numbers don't really suggest that he's a great defender. I know it feels like he fouls out of every game, but he brings a lot of energy on this end of the floor that seems to, like, disrupt some offenses at times. So I think there's, like, some playmaking upside on this end. Even a guy like Simeon Wilcher, he's got a career basically 2% block and steal rate, both as a 6'4" guard. So I think there is some playmaking upside with this defense. But yeah, I mean, I think playmaking and defensive rebounding are two areas that I see that could be strengths.
Cody, anything to add here before diving into weaknesses?
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly I would just agree with, the defensive rebound rate being a strength, and Sean Miller teams are always good on the defensive glass as well. And I kind of just like the roster. I like it far more than I do on the offensive end. I just think they have some nice pieces here that can defend in space, are fairly switchable. And I think Dallin Swain and Tremont Mark are kind of the headliners of that group, at least in the main rotation. Like, Simeon Wilcher's solid. He played for a really good St. John's defense last year. You mentioned Weaver. He's a ball hawk that, the numbers don't really show how active and how good of a defender he really is. And then I do like Cam Heide as well as a 3-4 hybrid there. And, some guys down the board, like Declan Duru, I think can be a guy that comes in and plays a role at the 4 position. He's a good athlete, can get on the glass and has some weak side rim protection playmaking in the tank. So I do like the depth of this roster more from a defensive standpoint. But just to get into the weaknesses, I guess I would have, like, a little bit of pushback with this team being able to turn teams over. Like, I like the guard group and the wing group. Like, I think they can make some plays on their own, but I think the bigs kind of limit what they can do from a turnover forcing standpoint, particularly like how they're guarding the pick and roll and just how they're defending that in general. It's like these guys can really only play and drop. Like Voikatitis and Traore don't really move their feet well in space. They're not able to, hedge and recover at that high of a level. So I do think that's going to force this defense to be a little bit more passive. And it's a team that's going to really depend on their first shot defense. I think it's going to be, they're going to be able to force a lot of shots in the mid range, I think, with this drop coverage as well. And then the solid defenders that they have in space. And then, as a whole, I just don't really think there's, like, a ton of dominant traits from this defense. Like, Voikatitis and Traore are big bodies, but I wouldn't consider them as, like, versatile rim protectors. Like, they're going to do their jobs on the defensive glass, but I just don't think they're completely overwhelming as a rim defense.
All right. And Marcus, we're going to send it back over to you. Who's the MVP? Who's the X factor of the Texas Longhorns?
Yeah, before I get into that, just wanted to, like, add something real quick on the front court. I do have pretty big concerns with the rim protection. I think, like looking at Voikatitis, like last year at FAU, 6.1 fouls per 40. And, he's now coming to the SEC where I feel like that number could potentially be even bigger. We talk about all the time, these SEC games go like 2.5 hours, and there's lots of fouls called in this league, and I don't consider him to be a fantastic rim protector. The numbers back that up as well. So I think I have issues with the rim protection for sure. But yeah, MVP, I went with Tremont Mark. I think he's a guy that, like, we've seen him be really good before. It kind of last year was a little bit, again, sort of uneven for him. Felt like he came on a little bit later in the year. He had some nice games down the stretch in the SEC tournament when Texas went on that mini run. Then he had a nice game in the first four against Xavier. I think he's going to be the guy that has the ball in his hands the most in this offense. He's going to be initiating a lot of offense for himself. I think he has the ability to get to the rim, but geez, like he's been around forever. I mean, like, I'm glad that Texas has him, but he has been around forever. For my X factor, I went with the front court duo of Traore and Voikatitis. I think just, can they provide a little bit more rim protection? Can they be really good on both sides on the offensive and defensive glass? I think that, they're going to be a really key piece to whether or not they can reach the ceiling that we have set for them.
Cody, who's your MVP and who's your X factor for the Longhorns?
Yeah, I went with the other guy in the backcourt for MVP. I went with Jordan Pope. I just think he's a guy if there's a guy that's going to be more of a point guard for this team, more of a playmaker, I do think it's going to be Jordan Pope. Like, you look back at his days at Oregon State, last year it was just a 12.9% assist rate. Obviously, a lot of the on-ball stuff and a lot of the shot creation came from Trey Johnson. But at Oregon State, he had a 23.5% assist rate, and his efficiency numbers were much higher as well. Like, with relative to the usage that he received, he had a 26% usage rate and maintained the same efficiency there. So I do think with more time spent on the ball, more time in primary actions, I think Pope can kind of get back to that year that he had at Oregon State a couple of years ago. And for my X factor, I went with Dalen Swain. I just think he's a guy that's going to kind of connect all the dots really on both ends. Like, you can put the ball in his hands on the offensive end and ask him to create a little bit. He's going to be a very valuable ball handler in transition, can grab a rebound and go. And I think on the defensive end, I think he's a guy that's super switchable and can do a lot of different things for this defense as a guy that can make plays, whether that's, getting in the passing lanes, making a steal, getting out in transition, or making a play as like a weak side rim protector as well. So I think there's a lot of things that he does well that I think sort of go unnoticed. I think people are starting to notice him a little bit more now, but I just think he's a very undervalued player on both ends.
Marcus, let's talk about what we can expect from the Longhorns. What's their ceiling? What's their floor for this upcoming season?
I think, like, at their ceiling, they could finish like 8th in this league. I think, like, there are ways with this group, like if Jordan Pope, like you mentioned, can create some more offense, if Tremont Mark can be really good on the ball and be a little bit more efficient. Maybe like Wilcher has a bounce back shooting season. Maybe the rim protection is a little bit better. I think they can maybe get there. At their floor, I think they can finish 14th in the SEC. I just think there are a lot of ways for this to go wrong. Like, I think there's talent here, but I just don't love the offense. The front court defense isn't great. So I think there are just a lot of ways that this could go sideways.
And do you have a bold prediction to add for the season?
Yeah, I said Tremont Mark averages a career high 16.3 or better. I think, like, he averaged 16.2. I believe that was where at Arkansas. in 2023, 24. Yeah. So I think he can average 16.3. They're going to need some guys to put the ball in the basket. So, he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. And I think he should be creating a lot of offense for himself.
Cody, let's hear your ceiling and floor, and then wrap things up with a bold prediction of your own.
Yeah, a lot of optimism from the Longhorns fan here, huh? But no, I'm a little bit higher with the ceiling floor. I think they can finish 7th in the league as opposed to 8th. I think they could be an 8 seed in the tournament. Yeah, their ceiling is capped with the shot diet and not being elite in the extras or on the offensive glass. It's just going to be an efficiency issue on the offensive end. But I do think the defense can step up and be a solid SEC unit. I had my floor at 13th, and I think when you're at 13th, I think you can be around the bubble. If the SEC is just as good as it was last year, this is a league that got 14 bids last year. I don't completely see it that way, but I do think that puts you in the conversation at the very least. And I think their defense can sort of keep them out of the bottom of this league. But for my bold prediction, I went with the Jordan Pope stat. I went with him as my MVP, and I do think there's a little bit more there. He only averaged 11 points per game and 1.7 assists per game last season. I think he sees a bump in both areas. I think he can average 14 a game, or I'll go 14 and a half per game, and then 3.5 assists as well. I think he's just going to have the ball in his hands, operating in pick and roll much more often than he did last year.
One more
ahead,
thing. One more thing. I do want to throw something out there. Like Texas fan, I do think Sean Miller can get this thing right within a few years. They're not in a great spot right now. Like they're just kind of living in that middle of the pack of the SEC. But I do think that Sean Miller will do a good job and ultimately get this thing turned around a little bit, headed in the right direction here within the next couple of years.
There's hope. There's hope for Longhorns.
Leave the fans with some optimism. Yep.
Yeah, I like that.
Leaving myself.
All right, we're gonna wrap things up here before we get to any other negatives. But as always, thank you for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast.